the Future of Work webinar. I'm Sumit Oberoi, Industry Strategist with Autodesk, and delighted to be your MC today. I'd like to commence today's proceedings with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the webinar. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters throughout Australia and New Zealand. In terms of background, Deloitte was commissioned by the Autodesk Foundation to help identify the labour markets most vulnerable to technological disruption in the Asian Pacific region. Today, we want to report out the findings in identifying those most at risk and share potential interventions which can be scaled and adapted to different circumstances across our region. We will provide a perspective on how the findings can be considered more closely to home in Australia and New Zealand. Joining me today to assist is Nicole Scoble-Williams, partner, Deloitte Tomatsu Consulting. Nicole is joining us from Tokyo. Great to have you here, Nicole. David Rumbens, partner with Deloitte Access Economics, and David is joining us from Melbourne today. Thank you, David. And Andy Cunningham, our Regional Director with Autodesk, joining us from Sydney. So in terms of today's agenda, Andy will set the scene and provide an Autodesk address, building a workforce for the future. Then we'll pass it on to Nicole and David, who will follow up and work us through the findings of the Future of Work report. And then we'll open up to a Q&A, which I will help moderate with your active participation. I encourage you to please feel free to log your questions in the chat box. And yeah, we really look forward to this session. So now it gives me great pleasure to hand it over to Andy to address you all. Thank you, Andy.
Great, thanks, Sumit. I'll just get set up here briefly. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen there. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Sumit mentioned, my name's Andy Cunningham. I'm the Regional Director for Autodesk here in ANZ. And I'd like to, I guess, give you some perspective from Autodesk on what a future workforce may look like, how the nature of our work is changing, and some of the things we're seeing, across the industries that we serve, both given the events of the past 18 months, but also what we've seen building up to this for the past many years, in the design, the built environment, and the manufacturing space. There is definitely one thing that's for certain, and that's the nature of work is most definitely changing. We have a workforce that's shifting monumentally, and it's something that's not 10 or 15 years away. It's here right now. You can see for the last year we've all worked remotely. I'm still sitting in my daughter's bedroom here. She's moved out now. She's no longer here, but I'm still sitting in her room. And then that's just the nature of what's happened over the past few months and years. But we're all leveraging new tools and new ways of doing our jobs, and hopefully just as effective outside the office as we were inside. We've become far more flexible and more agile, and certainly more technology driven. And no one recognizes that more than us at Autodesk here. If you have a look at what we've got on screen there on the left, that's a technical room, believe it or not, in the early 70s. And that was really traditionally a whole bunch of men that would pore all over A0 plots. And the biggest piece of technology was, what was in between their ears and, the compass that you can see in their hand to draw arcs with. On the right now, you can see what design is like these days, with the advent of products like AutoCAD that Autodesk bring. So it's certainly more portable, and it's changed the laborious way that design has worked into something that's much more sort of portable. And it's that shift from the desk onto the computer is almost the same as the way that technology is changing our work now, because we're now moving from office-based to remote-based, cloud-based, etc. So it's just as big a shift as when we got off the drawing board back in the 70s. And as companies now, we're applying better tools, more efficient processes, and much more automation of tasks. And it's that last piece that we'll certainly explore today. But automation, as I speak to business leaders, it generally lends to one question that comes about, and it's really, a robot's going to replace my workforce. It's a fear, it's an opportunity, it's seen as a threat at times, but especially in our industries and in the prominent industries of today around manufacturing and construction. You've all seen pictures like what's on screen there. The car assembly line that used to be when we were making Model T Fords and even Falcons here in Australia in the early days. A whole bunch of humans sitting there, tack welding, etc. And then today, and even for many years, it's a whole lot of robots. I remember going out to Broadmeadows in Melbourne and seeing the EA Falcon first coming off the line, and there was robots back then even, and that was the start of automation in manufacturing. But the question that I get asked is, are workers being displaced by technology? And the overarching answer is no. Automation is not a job killer. We believe that you automate certain tasks, but not the job itself. So while automation will certainly change work, most definitely, it doesn't mean it'll be eliminated. And while it changes it doesn't mean that there'll be a shortage of work either. It just means the skills will change. People will need a new set of skills to work alongside the technology, work with the robots, work with the technology and drive it. So instead, automation creates opportunity. It reduces waste, it removes risk, it creates efficiency, and it helps us, the humans, do more. And by automating certain tasks, companies and individuals can take on more projects with the same workforce or with the same budgets, which means we'll be employing more people to take on more work. They'll just be doing different work and with different skills. So the question that we all should ask is not, are robots going to overtake the workforce, but what skills will our people need as business leaders, and how do we help them get those skills? Now, COVID certainly changed the workforce over the past 18 or 20 months, but this has been a long time coming. The mass urbanization of countries, the move to cities, the growth of the middle class has put a whole lot of pressure on our built environment and our manufacturing environments for many years now. It's an astonishing fact that nothing to do with COVID, but we need to build on average 13,000 buildings a day between now and 2050 to cope with both population growth and the shift to urban centres, so population shifts, But in surveys that we've seen, 80% of firms in the construction industry report it's difficult to find the right skilled workers to meet this demand. So there is work out there, and COVID exacerbates that because you can't import skills these days as easily as you could either. So here in Australia, there's a skills shortage, and we can't bring talent in. We need to find it and grow it, locally. In manufacturing, there's 10 million global manufacturing jobs that are currently unfilled, and that's putting $600 billion plus of revenue at risk. And that could be the loss by 2030. So, as the demand for more products, more stuff, comes, whether that's in buildings or whether that's in products that need to be manufactured, that's going to continue because, as I said, this middle class is growing, disposable incomes are growing, and so there's more people that can afford and want and desire more, which is great for, for the quality of life and the human race. But also the nature of people's demands are different as well. It's not like, again, I mentioned the Model T, you could have it in any color you wanted as long as it was black. These days, you can pick the color of your car down to, I'd like it, I'd like the leather to be that blue, or I want my kids' names on the side of my sneakers, or I want my earbuds to exactly fit my ear and be custom built for me. Now, that was the stuff of Star Wars, not that long ago, and now it's demanded, it's expected. My kids turn around and say, "What do you mean you're not getting customized earbuds?" So that puts more pressure and more demand on manufacturing, and the skill shortage. And shortage of talent in construction, given the opportunity that lies ahead, that's what brings the opportunity of automation to satisfy this demand. And as I said, that will change the nature of the workforce as opposed to replace it. And then along came this thing called COVID, which has just compounded these challenges. In fact, in many ways, the pandemic has been a forcing event for something that was already building up and getting ready to happen, and then COVID simply just drove it to a reality. And if there's a benefit of when we all do get out of this, and I can't wait for the day that we can look back on it, some of the transformations and some of the legacies and some of the learnings, I think, will be better off for us once we come out the other side. But I mean, we've spoken to customers, we've got some numbers. 85% of companies accelerated their digitization because of COVID, and 67% accelerated their automation and their artificial intelligence, within their organization. So it's forced it. There was two kinds of customers or two kinds of organizations. Pretty simply, those that were ready and had business resilience and operational plans in mind, and those that weren't. So we had certain customers where they were, they had knowledge workers that were fully remote by the weekend. Quite literally, we had a customer in New Zealand that, the Prime Minister closed New Zealand effectively on the Thursday. By the following Tuesday, they were a fully operational architectural practice with all their talent working at home remotely, and business continued. On the flip side, we had a lot of customers trying to catch up and are still trying to catch up. But they are doing so and making progress in that. And we've seen this automation element start to appear, not just in remote work, but everything from, whether it's food delivery, whether it's the way you order, the way you go to the supermarket or the store, the way you inspect real estate, the way you buy a car these days, it's different to what it was. And while it may not be as drastic as we come back out to some sort of normal, it will remain different. And, and as I said, hopefully we take away for the better. In our industries, we've seen industries shift to automation to alleviate safety concerns, and become more resilient as a result as well. So in the construction space, 2/3 of firms believe that COVID will accelerate digital transformation, and it needed it. Construction is one of the most lagging industries that we've seen as far as digital adoption. Half the businesses are already investing in that, and we're seeing that accelerate. In manufacturing, almost 90% of customers or our customers or firms are investing in digital transformation. And their big priority is operational resilience, not getting caught off guard when supply chains change or when staff moves shift. They need to be resilient in the way they look forward. And the acceleration of digital and automation technologies will have a significant impact on labour, which is what gets us to the topic of today, which is the changing workforce. World Economic Forum estimates that 1 billion people will need to be reskilled by 2030. That's almost 1/3 of our global workforce. And we need to fill millions and millions of different roles with the right skills. Yet we have millions of people looking for work at the same time. So it's skills as opposed to the people that are often the challenge. And that's a problem in Australia, but on a global scale as well. And so based on the research that you hear a little more of from our friends at Deloitte, there are 4 key insights that we came to view to address the skills gap. The first is tying to more transferable capabilities. How do you shift the development focus to more foundational analytical problem solving skills that are portable as the demand shifts, as your role shifts? How can you transfer these skills from role to role? Secondly, it's continuously upgrading your skills. The pace of change means you always need to be trying to stay ahead, always need to be learning. So it's not you do your learning and then you go off to work. Those days are certainly past us. It's a more iterative process now to ensure greater stability in roles and also continuity of learning. And to do that, we need to shorten the distance between learning and work. It's not really acceptable these days to take 5 days off and go and do that training course. It's more on the job. It's more just in time or in sort of bite-sized pieces. Which means we need to embed the learning into the workplace and bring the learning ability into the environment, shorten that distance, as I mentioned. And then finally, we need to address systematic challenges between government, industry, academia to work better to help people find these skills. So as Autodesk, in the private sector, we believe we can certainly help in what sort of training and credentialing and certification elements we can put in place. How do we bring the tools to the job to shorten that distance? And then how do we play our part in the collaboration between government and the public sector? Some examples of that on the training side, on the left there, you can see, we launched our new training and credentialing platform at Autodesk University last year, which is designed to make training more personalized. So workers can get credentials online on their terms and their timelines, as opposed to going and having to do that training course. And they can build personalized learning pathways depending on the skills that they need. With regard to some tools, what you can see in the middle of the screen there is the Autodesk command map. Now, this is an overarching tool that watches how you use a particular Autodesk product. It'll then highlight areas that you're proficient in and areas that you need to improve on or could improve on for greater benefit. And it'll benchmark you against what we're seeing against the industry as well to help you focus in the right area, depending on the discipline and what are common used functions and features in that area of work. And then finally, collaboration. This takes many forms, but it's probably the most difficult, but has the biggest return as well. We really need to come together as government, as academia, and as the commercial organisations to in a collaborative effort to reach out to workers and put more accessible training in place. And the World Economic Forum states that if we do that together collaboratively, then we can reach 77% of workers, as opposed to just 25% if the public sector were to take this alone. So we really need to bridge those gaps. So I've spoken quite a bit, but what I'd like to do is give you a few examples of the future of work in action as it pertains to our industries, whether you're in the built environment or if you're in the manufacturing space. There's a lot of opportunities created alongside this future work style. And so we'll start off in manufacturing. So you may be familiar with additive manufacturing or 3D printing. Now, a lot of people think a 3D printer is a cool little thing you can make key rings for your kids with. And that's certainly what a lot of us see, the little things you can buy in stores for a few $100s. But if you take that onto a mega scale, have a look at this project. This is the port of Rotterdam, which is the largest port in Europe. Now, historically, if a vessel came in with a broken propeller, it's a multi-million-dollar part, and you don't just have these lying around. It takes weeks or months to order and deliver these components, which means you've got a mega ship sitting there doing nothing, which is a costly exercise. So the Port of Rotterdam opened what they call RAM Lab, which is an on-site facility where they include a pair of 6-axis robotics arms, and they manufacture large industrial metal parts on demand, which is less wasteful, just in time. And as you can see there, they finish the product on site and they get the ship back on the water much quicker as a result. The second is robotics, and this is data collection. Now, I find this one a little weird. This is Spot the Robotic Dog, which is produced by Boston Dynamics for data collection. Now, a firm called HoloBuilder, which are a German-American firm, were the first to utilize Spot. And if you watch this is Spot roaming around a work site, and it's equipped to roam the construction site with a 360-degree camera sitting on top of it, a bit like Google Street View. And this is scanning for daily progress of the work. So in the past, you'd have a surveyor that was walking around with a camera, taking photos every day of what's changed, what's shifted, how do we update the model. Now we have, we have Spot roaming around instead with the scanner on top, and it's really freeing up the human field engineers to do much more interesting, much more productive work. Still a little strange seeing a dog roam around a work site like that, but this is reality today, and that roams around and just gives daily updates of the build process. Still on construction, but shifting a little. This is the intersection of manufacturing and construction. This is a company called Factory OS, and they're based in Vallejo in California. And what they're doing is they're taking construction off-site, right, and they're industrializing it. So they're building multifamily or apartment-based buildings in a factory instead, undercover, safe environment, controlled environment to save time, save money, and save their employees and the environment as well. So it's cheaper, which means more people can afford the housing as a result. And it's this sort of innovation that they're using in California, in San Francisco, and the housing crisis in the Bay Area to make housing more affordable. It's also opening up construction to new workers, to more women in this particular industry as well. And they invest in their employees because actually 60% of their workforce have never been previously employed in construction. So they're using portability of skills and then a lot of training to actually change that workforce. A couple of final examples. This one here is manufacturing as a service, and this is almost like a micro factory. And this is a company called Plethora, and they have a whole lot of on-demand capability, basically. So customers will upload their designs to Plethora's mills, and these guys basically manufacture their parts to order in as quick as a few days. Now, it used to be, you'd set up a manufacturing plant to make thousands, hundreds of thousands of the same product over and over again. What we're now seeing is the ability to produce unique products instead. The different needs, as I said, of styling, of customization, are of multiple customers at a low cost. So you might be making car components one day and industrial design components the next, or housing components the next. And these people are producing different parts every day, which makes manufacturing more accessible. So you can actually be a manufacturer and not own a single piece of any equipment. You can outsource the entire process as long as you've got your idea in mind. And the final example is in the architectural or the built environment. This is urban space and planning by Daiwa House. Daiwa House is one of Japan's largest, or I think Japan's largest construction firm. And the Japan residential construction industry have got a really unique challenge in that there's high demand for long-term housing in urban areas, but it's offset against the real scarcity of land. If you've ever spent any time in Tokyo, you'll understand how compact and how small the parcels of land can be. So Daiwa House is using generative design to basically develop custom systems that analyze and optimize building on small parcels of land. So the generative design engine will take cues from the natural world, the space, the parcel, and evolve them with various needs. Now, designers and engineers, they input parameters, space requirements, number of rooms, building materials, constraints, council rules, etc. And they generate an immense iterative process of possible design solutions. And then they use the selection process to choose their chosen design. What this brings is variety. Rather than having a whole lot of repetitive conventional designs, you've got iterative designs that are being chosen, which is giving a lot more possibilities that deviate from conventions in a lot of positive ways. So I guess to conclude, I'd like to say that the future of work is still very much human, despite it being changed. Our encouragement and our message is really to future-proof your workforce with great technology, but certainly with a lot of insights into how your people are using that technology and some great training as well. So thanks for your time today, and I'll hand you back to Sumit. Sumit, back to you.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks for setting the scene. Fantastic presentation. Really trying to connect the piece of what's happening in the marketplace with technology and new processes, but also really honing in on some of those capabilities in which will support the industry moving forward. It gives me great pleasure now to hand it over to David and Nicole to really do a bit more of a dive into the findings of the future of work. So, David, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Over to you.
Thanks, Sumit. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for joining. Just a reminder, I'd love to get some questions from the audience as well as we go through, both to responses to Andy's brilliant presentation, the fantastic technology examples, and also the material that Nicole and I will go through, the future of work research that Deloitte has conducted for the Autodesk Foundation. Andy's provided those examples of digital trends and the discussion of the implication of that for skill sets going forward. It's really critical on a number of levels for us to be focusing on this issue around the future of work and digital trends. Critical for individuals with for their own skill sets, their own careers. They kind of learn once and then forever apply your skill set model has gone. It is we're now in a world where skills need to be refined and updated over time. It's critical for businesses in terms of productivity and making sure that businesses remain leading edge and indeed competitive in a competitive environment. But it's also important for society in terms of overall welfare as we manage the transition to greater levels of automation and digital skills, but in a way that we don't leave people behind on that adjustment path. And that's partly what we looked at in the work that Deloitte's conducted for Autodesk. The focus was APAC, so Asia Pacific as a whole, but also focusing on Australia within that, and the role of digital change and automation across countries. How well prepared are different industries across the region for the digital change that's occurring? We know broadly, this is something that we shouldn't be shying away from, from a society point of view, that the digital change is important in driving gains in productivity, gains in living standards, and also gains in jobs overall. It's clear that digital change is complementary to jobs creation. And you can look at those sectors or those countries for periods of times where there's been faster digital change, and invariably there's also been more rapid jobs growth as well. But it tends to be new jobs or different jobs or different roles for some jobs, and so there is an adjustment path, and some jobs do get displaced, or at least there's different skill sets that are required to do them effectively, and so that the adjustment costs can be significant, and so it's something that we need to be mindful of, society as a whole, but also particularly for business, and in understanding the broader impacts of the application of technology change. So the work that we looked at focused on identifying areas of economies that are perhaps most vulnerable to digital change, and the adjustment costs that are borne often by lower skilled, less prepared workers within those economies. And before I get to kind of the findings from the research, we might just put it in the context of the current environment we live in, and the challenges we're facing in a COVID environment in Australia are ones which in many ways are kind of accelerating many of the digital trends we're looking at. The fact that we are living with and for periods of time been living with heavier restrictions has meant a focus on new models of work, new methods of connecting with each other, new methods of doing things on site when you perhaps don't have access to the same workforce, or perhaps there's supply chain issues impacting a work site. Basically, there's a demand driver there, and at the same time, we're working, many of us, in an environment where there's been a restriction, or not a restriction, but difficulty in sourcing additional workers to fill out our workforces. So we've got this dichotomy in the environment where we've restricted activity, but at the same time, it's very hard to find workers. So we've seen employment be volatile, but as we see on the chart on the right, job advertisements in key professions and skill sets have gone very high and stayed very high, even as employment has come down across the major states that are subject to restrictions at the moment. So, in a way, that this is providing and the environment is providing an impetus towards technological change. The difficulty in sourcing additional workers in an environment where we've got closed international borders and not access to the same skilled migrant talent that we might have had in the past. And at the same time, that environment is encouraging workers to, or requiring workers to upskill to match that technology change. We can see that the number of unemployed persons per job vacancy at the moment is at an all-time low, even though for a large part of the past 18 months, our economy has gone backwards. But it highlights that the dual labour market that we see at present. Some people can't work, some people are adjusting to new roles, often with technology change as part of it. But at the same time, many businesses can't fill the vacancies that they have. And in fact, our Deloitte CFO survey that we run every 6 months, and we ran again in July, the number one issue identified by CFOs, the number one thing that they were concerned about the external environment, was securing and retaining talent. So 78% of CFOs rated that as a significant issue. 66% rated the pandemic as an issue. So it's become broader than just or more important than just the COVID environment itself, the difficulty in securing talent, and hence the impetus for looking at alternate solutions with technology, which then requires or creates the need for upskilling. So if we look at the work that's Deloitte's conducted across APAC as a whole, and looking at the impact of automation and the ability of different countries to manage that, we tried to do this objectively in looking at, well, what are the components that define across industries the different impact of the impact of automation across different industries. And so we created an impact index, which looked at things like the level of routineness within a given industry in a country. So noting that where there's higher levels of routineness, that means there's greater propensity or greater likelihood of automation taking place over time, within that sector. Things like, level of cognitive abilities within particular occupations, that tends to lower the risk of automation. And then at the same time, looking at the extent of advantage or disadvantage within a workforce, how well prepared are workers to adjust to change over time. So that tends to be affected by things like education levels, wage levels, and critically, one of the things that Andy noted, transferability of skills. The more that we have the ability to transfer skills, transfer people from one occupation to another, the better that we can manage the change from automation and therefore reap the benefits while minimising the costs. We looked at that impact index relative to the preparedness of a country or an industry to adjust to change. And if we look across APAC as a whole, so the 12 markets that we focused on, we can see there's a fair spread in terms of the likelihood of automation across different sectors. So here we're kind of looking at the horizontal scale and looking at the opportunity. You can see it as the opportunity for automation by sector, and so you've got construction kind of leading the way. You've got sectors like mining, logistics, agriculture, manufacturing, utilities, all showing very high levels of opportunity for automation across APAC over time. Less so across many of the services and social services and professional services sectors, where arguably there can be less routineness in roles, although there's still opportunity there as well, across all sectors. We then think of, well, how well placed might these sectors be to adapt to that change, and so the vertical axis is the extent of disadvantage. And across the Asia Pacific region, the one that stands out there is agriculture as having a significant risk or opportunity of automation over time, but one which is generally, and less true for Australia, but generally across AP, an area where there's low wages, low opportunities, low skills development, perhaps low transferability of skills. So from a policy management point of view, that those opportunities need to be perhaps couched against the potential for negative effects from worker change over time. Just briefly before I pass over to Nicole to talk about preparedness, if you looked at Australia on a similar map rather than just APAC as a whole, kind of similar picture. Mining and construction were down a little bit in terms of opportunity, partly because there's quite a degree of automation has already occurred across those sectors. Agriculture and logistics relatively move up a little with greater opportunity there. But if you look at those key sectors, we're looking at about 3 billion people across the Australian economy that are currently employed in manufacturing, construction, agriculture and logistics, where there's still significant opportunity and likelihood for automation to be occurring, to change work practices over time, and therefore this is a cohort of people that we need to think about and to care about when we're looking at their preparedness to take part in that change in skills over time. Nicole, I'm going to pass over to you now to talk through that preparedness side of the work.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Wonderful to have the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. As David said, we looked at the level of impact, but then we said, well, what does that mean? What do we do? And, I think we've heard a number of comments from Andy and David that have really highlighted the way that in this COVID moment, preparedness is center stage. I mean, we also did a global human capital trends study earlier this year. And when we asked executives around the globe, what is your top priority for navigating this world of perpetual disruption? They could have said anything, but they said the ability of our people to adapt, reskill, and assume new roles. So again, tying into that theme that you were talking about, David, around transferability of skills. And so when we kind of looked at what does preparedness really mean, we looked at it through two dimensions. First of all, about at a national level, what is our ability to support disadvantaged workers? And how ready are we to take advantage of the opportunities that automation is presenting for us? And here you can see, as we did that and then looked at preparedness relative to the level of impact or the vulnerability to, those impacts of automation, you can see on the bottom right, those countries that are more vulnerable to the impacts of automation and also less prepared in responding to those, as opposed to what we see in the upper left quadrant, where we see those countries that are not as at risk of being disrupted by the impacts of automation and are more prepared to use those impacts as a catalyst to unlock new opportunities and new possibilities. So if we look at Australia there, for example, it was the country who was the second least vulnerable to being disrupted by the impact of automation. And it was the country most prepared in terms of using automation as an opportunity. If we just look a little bit more deeper at what is it that is driving Australia's strength in preparedness, on the next slide, we see how Australia compared against some of the APAC countries that were considered in our research, particularly in terms of these 4 particular indicators. The preparedness framework that we developed included 19 different indicators. Here we're looking at only 4 of those, and we're looking at Australia compared to some of those other APAC countries. So you can see Australia best in class in terms of proportion of population covered by social protection measures. We can also see Australia performed quite well when we look at those other 3 indicators around businesses providing training, workers being willing to reskill, and R&D expenditure. But of course, there's always room to improve and work to be done. I mean, even if we just look at R&D, for example, despite the fact that Australia led the way in being prepared for the impacts of automation, you can see that when you compare Australia to Korea in relation to R&D, there is huge opportunity that Australia has not yet tapped into. And so we then went a step further and said, well, how do we actually then identify very targeted initiatives that can improve the level of preparedness? And those initiatives may be at an individual level, at an organizational level, industry, or government. And on the next slide, you can see the initiatives framework that we developed to help navigate how can we be targeted. This framework was built upon Autodesk's strategic future of work framework that uses these 3 dimensions of foresight and mindset, skills and learning, and access and inclusion. So looking at those 3 dimensions all being equally important in needing to make sure we're taking a holistic approach to be able to really unlock those opportunities that automation can offer. Also understanding that as we are looking at these initiatives, there is no one size fits all. So we really have to be selective and targeted based on the workforce demographic, the dynamics and characteristics of the industry or the geography. So this was a framework designed to really try to be targeted. If we look, for example, at foresight and mindset, so here we are talking about initiatives that are really trying to drive a mindset around constant evolution and adaptation. And this is really where we're also trying to bring to life that collective action that Andy referred to several times. How do we bring together business, academia, governments, industry, private sector, public sector, coming together, working together to realign the skills and capabilities of the workforce with the emerging roles and industries. And if we look at Australia, for example, a really good initiative that is really impressive at the moment is the Career Transition Assistance Program. This is a program focusing on supporting job seekers, primarily aged 45 years and older, helping them develop those practical technology skills to help improve their employability. Now, what's really significant here is when you really look at how that is trying to unlock that mindset that is really looking at that lifelong process of, portfolio careers, the encore career, how do we actually create and value this whole framework where we can continue to go through transitions, onboarding and offboarding into different careers, regardless of age or any other factors. On the skills and learning front, it's probably quite explanatory, but I think what we often forget is in order to really have an impact and move the needle here, we need mechanisms in place to be able to keep ahead of the current, emerging, and future skill and capability requirements. And an excellent initiative here, again, Australia, they've established a National Skills Commission. This commission is purposed to provide expert advice and national leadership, identifying those current, emerging, and future skills, and really trying to bring that insight by, it's doing a lot of data analysis, whether it's through employer surveys or whether it's through, deep labor market research, but also really as a next step, going to be focusing on communication with the workforce. How do we provide that visibility and access to all of these insights around what are the most in demand and emerging skills and capabilities? So as the workforce, whether it is workers who are entering the workforce for the first time, or whether it's workers who are already in well-established careers, they are armed with that and they can be proactive in navigating, how do I actually respond to some of this disruption that I may be experiencing? And then access and inclusion. Of course, here we're focusing on how do we provide equitable access and opportunities around jobs, around training, around the ability to reskill. One of the areas that we hear a lot about is small business. Quite often small businesses don't have the same financial capacity and just means in general to be able to focus on adopting and embracing digital transformation technology in ways that they really need to keep up and compete in their particular, industry, sector, whatever. And so this is where initiatives like we've seen in Australia, where they've got the Digital Champion Small Business Initiative, where they're providing funding to, at the moment, they've provided funding to 100 small businesses, enabling them to really access digital support, whether it be through improving or upgrading hardware, software, online content, digital training, just really trying to give them the means to enter that whole digital transformation agenda. And some of those small businesses have then been selected as champions and have had extra support in the form of mentoring from digital mentors. Again, another similar, another initiative in relation to the access and inclusion would be what we're seeing in terms of like the New South Wales government commitment and investment in Australia regions around really trying to focus on the digital divide. How do we really get that regional digital connectivity where we're thinking about, mobile phone coverage, internet infrastructure, all of those things? So that's just to sort of give you a high level overview, in terms of how we went from understanding impact, then actually saying, well, how do we know who is positioned and prepared to be able to use those impacts for opportunity and possibility? And then actually say, well, how do we translate that into the so what? How can we be very intentional in the context, as I said, of our industry, our sector, our geography, or those kind of things? David, any additional commentary you'd kind of like to layer over in terms of how we've pulled all this together?
No, look, nothing further from me, Nicole. I hope that was terrific, and I hope the audience has enjoyed that. Our report is available for you to look through. So we might now pass back to Sumit for Q&A.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Nicole. And I'll invite Andy back to the panel as well. We have started to receive some questions, so that's fantastic. So I encourage all of our attendees to fire some questions. Perhaps I'll direct this to you, David. Do you have an idea on why some of the R&D is so low compared to others like Korea?
Yeah, look, it's kind of a feature of the Australian economic landscape, and not a good one, unfortunately, that we have typically had less business expenditure on R&D than other countries, where perhaps it's more encouraged, that there's more tax incentives, but structurally, Australia does tend to bat above its weight in terms of government research, but less so in business. And this kind of discussion that we're having now, it's clearly very relevant to encouraging that digital change, and I see it as a ongoing opportunity for Australia. Yeah.
So just in terms of, sorry, Nicole, did you want to add something to that? No, you're good.
It's absolutely on point.
Terrific. Just in terms of some key ANZ findings, David, by comparison to our APAC counterparts, we had that good description, particularly with the preparedness framework and where we're sitting in terms of those quadrants. Yeah. But we just to unpack some of those, because it's all about how we support the region to be competitive, obviously high labour costs and input costs and so forth. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on some of the findings there.
Yeah, so look, Australia as a wealthy, developed country compared to some of the others that we looked at has essentially a great advantage in terms of preparedness. We do have higher wage levels. We do have, we can invest in education. Critically, we can invest in ongoing education as well, and partly that's government, but partly it's individual and business led, and I think we'll need all three. So those are things that work in features that work in Australia's favour. In terms of the opportunity for automation, look, some sectors have already gone down the track. Some of what's happening in the mining sector in WA, for example, for iron ore is just astounding in terms of level of automation and technology applied, and how much further can you actually go. You might start to run into lesser ability to reduce processes, but across other sectors, there's still lots of opportunity in Australia, even if it's perhaps at a different level to other AP countries. So areas like construction, logistics, agriculture, there's still lots of labour-intensive processes that can be looked at, and because we have high labour costs, it does provide an incentive for businesses to review those, because we can generate efficiencies from those. and also, give people more interesting things to do. What we've found not only across this work, but other studies, as you change up the task mix and it becomes less routine and more sort of cognitive based, employees are more engaged, with their employer, and you actually get higher retention, which is pretty important in the environment at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's great, David. Andy, just drawing on some of the parallels that you were drawing upon in your presentation, at the end of the day, it's really about enriching, people's opportunities in the workforce. But, it's just in terms of the future of the workforce, it's fair to say we're looking at more of a transformation rather than a disruption piece.
Well, definitely. As I was saying, I think, what we're going to see is an extension of traditional skills and traditional design that's just going to be, replicated and being more productive as a result, and that's whether it's in the AEC or the manufacturing industry. I think what we're seeing is traditional skills just being amplified, rather than being replaced. So it's almost putting the ability of the technology, in the hands of people that traditionally didn't have that capability, and allowing them to get the benefits of that. So good old school design, creative thinking, etc., is still required. It's just bringing the modern capabilities to more of those people. The other thing is, I think it'll, as I mentioned, it'll change the nature of work and create new opportunities in the AEC space as well. Big data and the learnings that we'll get from that. So the data analytical skills, and the learnings from a particular project, so you don't make the same mistake again, for example. That's an opportunity for the industry. But also, how do we roll up what's happening site by site, job by job, into site planning, urban planning, and goodness, building codes for Australia, for example, that can actually learn what's happening on the job, because big data will let us replicate that and get a feel for what's happening en masse. Maybe we can create better cities, better environments, better built products as a result of the learnings that will come out of the automation of some of the sort of on the ground tasks.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think that ties in nicely to the next question that I was going to pose to you, Nicole, particularly around, I know Deloitte has undertaken a number of global studies on the future of work, and a lot of work that you're headlining throughout a number of different industries. But are there some programs and activities that we could consider, from some of the industries that you've looked at, that we can adapt to the AEC industry to really support the pace of industry change as we move forward?
Yes, so if I may tackle that from a broader perspective in terms of what are the lessons we've learned, all of the perspective that we've been able to capture. If we think about, for example, accountants, lawyers, doctors, we look at the role that professionalization has had in those sort of industries and occupations. I think we've learned an awful lot about the way that professionalization can really promote and drive that ongoing development, evolution of, what is the work across certain roles and tasks and jobs. So I think that's one thing I would say. The other thing, more broadly, that I think I'm going to use an example that may seem a very simple and old example, but I think Andy also just touched on this. Let's think back to what happened when ATMs were introduced into bank branches. The world was falling down. We all expected that, anyone who was a bank teller was really going to be in trouble. Now, there is no question that every single bank teller's job was disrupted. There was no single bank teller that was not disrupted by the introduction of those ATMs. But look at how that industry really used that moment of introducing ATMs to really unlock new opportunities, new aspirations, and now look at the value that we receive when we walk into a branch and walk out. And so I think, sometimes we try to really, look for those sophisticated examples, and quite often we need to really go back to those fundamentals in terms of where have there been those really big moments where we've seen those bold moves. And also keep in mind, right up front, Andy talked about the way that automation is applying at a task level. So how do we completely disrupt our thinking about what is a job and turn our minds to how do we start deconstructing and packaging roles and tasks so as we can use all of this amazing technology that's just going to continue to proliferate and really find better ways to unlock those opportunities. So they're the kind of things that I would say are top of mind for me when I'm really trying to think about what can we learn here about those that have been before us.
It's great, Nicole. David, I know you've done a lot of through your labour mobility analysis as an economist and working closely with government. But is there some things that you're seeing at the moment? I know you set the scene in terms of the challenges that we have with the skilled workforce, but picking up on Nicole's point, there's some things that we can, from a short-term perspective, start to hone in.
Yeah, look, I think at the moment it is worth having a particular focus on retention. I mean, as a society, we spend more on money on hiring people than we do on training our own workforce in terms of business expense. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of flip that around and try and get the productivity benefits that come from that. So I think embracing our current workforces, in an environment where there's skill shortages, where international borders are still closed, is going to be important. And that's also in the context of introducing technology change. We've got to think about it in business in a way that our workers embrace the change that's coming. So when we introduce, Spot the robotic dog on the building site, it's the person who was doing those roles needs to feel that they're part of the solution too, and so they're able to do some other functions that are actually going to be more productive for the organisation.
He or she's using the remote control, or
exactly. Yeah. Look, they could be, and if that's not appropriate, that there's another role. So let's not have. I think in the past, businesses often sometimes focused on tech change as labour saving, but we've got to change the mindset to labour enhancing. And so we don't need to largely make our current workforce redundant. The measure is, okay, let's introduce technology to enable part of our workforce to do something that's more productive.
Fantastic. I'm conscious we're getting close to time, but I just wanted to take this time to thank you for the great support that Deloitte has provided Autodesk through the foundation with this report. We really appreciate the partnership with Deloitte and look forward to working through some of the activities and actions as we move forward to support the industry. The recording, I understand, will be shared out to attendees today, and the report is publicly available. If you have any further questions, by all means, please feel free to reach out to Nicole, David, Andy, and myself, and we're more than happy to give you further insights into the report as we move forward. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for attending, and I think this was a great conversation today, and really appreciate you being part of this.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks all.
Thanks all. Stay safe, everyone.